attending our third session of our Beijing Plus 30 series. I'd like to thank John Jay College of Criminal Justice, Rosemary Barbara Ray, Jillian Nazareth D'Souza Nazareth, and all of those who work so diligently to bring this to fruition. I'd also like to thank our honored guests for taking the time to be with us today, and we're looking forward to learning a lot about ways of mitigating the violence that women experience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lily, who is our member of our executive committee and the moderator for today's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. As Pam mentioned, I'll be moderating the event. I'll just go over the plan for this afternoon and provide a bit of context for the conversation we will have around gender-based violence. And then I will read the bios of our speakers. We'll head into a panel discussion. We'll also have time for you to ask questions. So I hope you'll be listening intently and formulating questions that you will ask our guests. And then at the end, Pam will come back up and close us out. So as was mentioned, this is part of a series called the Beijing Declaration Platform for Action, reflecting on the past and leaning forward. This afternoon's session, titled Unite Against Gender-Based Violence, will focus on how we can prevent GBV, respond when it occurs, and fund initiatives aimed at eliminating gender-based violence. So just a little bit of context as to why we're continuing to have this conversation. According to UN Women, one in three women worldwide experience physical or sexual violence, mostly by an intimate partner. Of the 165 countries with domestic violence laws, only 104 countries have comprehensive legislation addressing domestic violence. And then only 40% of women who experience gender-based violence seek help or of any kind after experiencing violence. And I want to be clear, and this has been said a number of times, violence against women is 100% preventable through preventative education measures for all members of society, through policy, and through advocacy. And there's continued conversations around how we can come together and engage in advocacy around this. So most notably, there's the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which is happening on the 25th of November. This was an initiative that was launched in 1991 by the Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rutgers University in New Jersey. So it starts on the 25th of November and ends on the 10th of November. These are very important dates. The 25th is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So it runs through the 25th until the 10th, which is the International Human Rights Day. So this is an initiative that aspires to inspire action to combat such violence in all of its forms. And maybe I'll share a little bit about this campaign in case there's some individuals who are new to this initiative. The origins of the 16 days of activism, they remind us of the immense difficulties that women face, especially in public life. On the 25th of November, in 1960, sisters Patria, Minerva, and Maria Teresa Mirabal, they were three political activists who actively opposed the cruelty and systemic violence of the Trujillo dictatorship in Dominican Republic. They were violently killed and dumped at the bottom of a cliff by the Trujillo secret police. Upon this, they became symbols for the feminist resistance, and in commemoration of their deaths, the 25th of November was declared International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women in Latin America in 1980. This International Day was formally recognized by the UN in 1999. In 1991, the Center for Women's Global Leadership, alongside participants of the first Women's Global Institute on Women, Violence, and Human Rights, called for a global campaign of 6 days of activism against gender-based violence in their honor. So every year, this campaign creates an opportunity for us to articulate and challenge the attitudes that perpetuate, rationalize, or normalize GBV. And this is exactly what we're going to do today. So I'll start by reading the bios of our speakers and then go into our panel discussion. So first, I would like to introduce Dr. Mangai Natarajan, who is a professor at the Department of Criminal Justice at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, CUNY. Professor Natarajan is a criminologist and crime scientist who has over 30 years of experience in studying various forms of gender-based violence, including sexual harassment, acid and dowry violence, honor-based violence, intimate partner violence, and sexual violence, including conflict-related sexual violence. She is a trained criminal prevention specialist, a widely published and active researcher with a life mission to find ways of saving the lives of victims vulnerable to various forms of violence. So looking forward to hearing from you, Dr. Mankai. Next, I'd like to introduce Catherine Travers, who's a policy specialist within the Ending Violence Against Women team department section. You never know with UN terminology at UN Women. Catherine's work at UN Women focuses on addressing sexual harassment in different settings, including in public spaces, transportation, workplaces, and online. Prior to joining UN Women, she worked as a development officer for Democratic Life at Concertation Montréal and is the former executive director of Women in Cities International. She has also worked as a global consultant on issues of gender, safety, public participation, urban development, and governance. She has a master's degree in urban studies, a master's degree in international peace studies, and a bachelor's degree in criminology and sociology. Welcome, Catherine. Next, we have Elsa Marie da Silva, who is the founder of Red Dot Foundation and president of Red Dot Foundation Global. Its platform, Safe City, crowdsources personal experience of sexual violence and abuse in public spaces. Since Safe City started in December 2012, it has become the largest crowd map on the issue in India and abroad. Elsa Marie is listed as one of the BBC Hindi's 100 Women, has won the Vital Voices Global Leadership Award, Female Entrepreneurship of the Year Award, Niti Aayog's Women Transforming India Award, and the She People's Digital Award in Social Impact. Prior to Safe City, Elsa Marie was in the aviation industry for 20 years, where she worked with Jet Airways and Kingfisher Airlines. Her last portfolio was Vice President of Network Planning and Charters, where she oversaw the planning and implementation of 500 daily flights. Welcome, Elsa Marie. We're looking forward to hearing from you. So lastly, we have Luisa Kislinger, who is a feminist advocate, writer, and international consultant with over 20 years of experience working on gender equality and women's rights issues at the international, regional, and grassroots level. It's lovely to see you again. we are briefly colleagues on the NGO CSW exec. Luisa holds a bachelor's degree in international studies and a master's degree in communications, both from the Universidad Central de Venezuela. Oh, is this better? Okay. She is a former career diplomat from the Venezuelan Foreign Service and worked at the permanent mission of Venezuela to the UN, where she was one of the lead negotiators during the Beijing +5 process and facilitated the adoption of several gender-related resolutions. In 2016, she founded the Asociación Civil Mujeres en Línea. All right. From where she has worked jointly with different local and regional NGOs. Luisa is the co-author of the book Dobre Crimen, published in 2021, about the story of Linda Loaiza, a survivor of sexual violence who took her case to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. So I'm very excited to hear from all of our panelists. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation. So the way we're going to do this is I'll pose a question. You're welcome to pick up whichever one you like. Don't feel pressure to answer every single question, but hopefully it will be an interactive conversation, and then we'll turn it over to our audience at 2:30. So you'll be ready to pose some questions to our panelists. So first, I'd like to start with the first question. What does prevention of GBV look like from your lens? So we'll start with that one, and any one of the panelists is welcome to pick up that conversation. That question, excuse me.
Okay, so being an academic, so we have a lot to really chew, and thank you so much for inviting me to this platform, and I'm indeed pleased and honored to be here. So from my lens, from researchers' lens, first of all, reducing risk associated with gender-based violence is a foundational strategy for its prevention. So effective prevention requires recognizing and addressing the risk factors contributing to perpetration or victimization. So over decades of research, numerous risk factors have been identified, including adverse childhood experiences, harmful social and gender norms, and economic and human insecurities. That means they stem from various causes such as abuse, trauma, lack of support, social pressures, and social media. The comprehensive prevention aims to influence laws, policies, practices, and behaviors at 4 levels. One at the individual level, relationship level, and also community level and societal level. There are 4 different levels. So much research have identified risks at these levels for each type of gender-based violence, but it is equally vital to expedite efforts to identify protective factors, because so many risk factors identified, but we have very few protective factors so far that can inform the development of effective prevention strategies. This involves many activities such as encouraging healthy relationships and positive social norms, fostering neighborhood connectedness, ensuring safe and stable environments for children and youth, combating discrimination, and offering trauma-informed support for survivors. When discussing gender-based violence, it is essential to recognize that it occurs various situations and environments. For instance, we can distinguish between acts of gender-based violence in non-conflict situations and those in conflict situations based on the context in which they occur. So we need to understand the contextual elements. Research has acknowledged the need for context-specific, crime-specific prevention interventions. Nonetheless, measuring gender-based violence prevention presents significant challenges at large. Ultimately, ending gender-based violence requires a multi-sectoral approach with sustained commitment, emphasizing long-term vision and efforts over temporary initiatives to foster impactful change. And there are so many issues that we are looking at, because gender-based violence is ubiquitous and situation-specific, exhibiting variations in types, tolerance levels, perpetrator types, situational contexts, individual versus group dynamics, cultural conditions, socio-economic political conditions, and criminal justice infrastructure. To end gender-based violence, we need a comprehensive approach that involves multiple sectors and a long-term commitment. Preventing gender-based violence involves creating an environment that addresses the drivers of violence and supports help-seeking behavior among survivors. This requires educating and empowering individuals to take charge of their lives by expediting reporting and accessing services to end gender-based violence. Apart from empowering women and young girls in combating gender-based violence, effective strategies involve mobilizing communities, institutionalizing prevention efforts, engaging youth, and collaborating with faith-based leaders. These actions are essential for creating a lasting change. We are looking for lasting change. And there are 3 primary agendas in the effort to end gender-based violence. One is primary prevention. This involves activities to prevent the initial perpetration of violence or victimization. It focuses on stopping violence before it occurs by addressing the underlying causes. That is social prevention. Initiatives are ongoing to create long-term changes in social norms within communities, institutions, and society. Effective primary prevention goes beyond mere awareness raising. We need theoretical frameworks, strategic approaches, and evaluation measures to inform that. The secondary prevention, this is where I'm sort of very much focused on. We need greater attention on this. This approach aims to prevent both the continuation and escalation of violence, which is crucial for addressing both personal and social harm. It necessitates a thorough understanding of context-specific factors such as structural oppression and discrimination, as well as varying risks faced by different individuals. By taking these elements into account, it is possible to design situational prevention programs that effectively focus on reducing the risks. This aspect of prevention is one that requires greater attention. And the tertiary prevention, this indirectly contributes to prevention by influencing community attitudes regarding violence against women. This is an ongoing process also. At the same time, the prevention efforts must begin at the local level. Think globally, but act locally. And focus on understanding what has been effective, what has worked and what has not worked, how to improve existing strategies, and what has been missing. These are the things one need to really think about to have evidence-based measures or prevention measures to address gender-based violence. And this is based on all of my research on various types of gender-based violence at large, and these are the synthesis of what I have been thinking and how both social and situational prevention can help reduce, not only reduce, it's sort of awaken people, energize people, empower people to go and report, because we need more people to report violence against them, because many of them are still under denial. We need that sort of platform to really help them so that we can reduce the risks and develop more protective factors to provide them safety and security and live the rights that they have in the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mangai. Would any of the other panelists like to, all right? So maybe we'll go to,
Okay.
all right, we'll go to Louisa and then we'll go to Catherine. Over to you. I think you can use this mic, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. It's alive. Very much alive. Yeah. Well, thank you first of all for this opportunity. This is an issue very dear to me as a professional in my personal capacity, and just to add that I'm here also as representing the UN Foundation, which is where I work right now, and I'm a senior manager at the Girls and Women's team, where we also have a few initiatives dealing with gender-based violence. So I'm also going to refer a little bit about that. But I just wanted to quickly add something to what you just said about reporting, and I'm going to be drawing, I'm going to be off script a little bit from some of the thoughts that I had gathered to share today, but in response to this question. But the issue of reporting, I'm from Venezuela, so the justice system is not particularly interested or functioning in a way that is capable to provide the responses that survivors and victims and those who are reporting are needed, you know? So at some point, the feminist movement, the women's rights movement in Venezuela, they started questioning whether the messaging was for them, you know, to ask women to go and report, because also what was seen was women were at risk or increased risk. Reporting became a risk factor for them to be even at risk of, if they were already at risk of physical violence, they probably were at heightened risk of femicide. So the narrative was sort of shifted because the justice system was just not dealing with the reporting. So it was about the services and the support that the feminist and women's rights organizations and the grassroots organizations could provide to the victims and to survivors of violence. So that, so I think it is important, an important way of also thinking about preventative efforts. It's thinking how to better equip these frontline responders, if you will, who are dealing with these cases in situations where impunity is rampant and where measures influencing policymakers or influencing government structures is not a possibility for civil society, particularly in authoritarian regimes. I'm sorry. or in regimes where civil society efforts or participation is not simply is not welcome or even limited. There are some places where, you know, there are venues to speak to elected officials, but, you know, sometimes those efforts don't go that far. So I think a way of looking at this again is channeling support. And when I say support, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is funding. And funding is needed, but also, in addition to that, we also need to, and at the UN Foundation, we do that. We rely on the experts who are on the ground. And I would add that that also includes victims and survivors, because they sometimes are the ones, they are the ones who do the walk. They are the ones doing the reportings. They are the ones saying the reporting didn't make any difference. I don't know what to do. I don't know, there's this gap here, there's this gap there. So I think a lot of what we do, generally speaking, you know, even if it's preventive efforts or response efforts, or I think for me, any aspect of programming or any activity related to GVB, we really need to incorporate the views of victims and survivors and support the work of feminist and women's rights organizations at the grassroots level, especially with funding, but also with other type of support. And hopefully it is flexible funding that they can use for different things. And maybe later we can talk a little bit more about that. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Luisa, and for pointing out, especially, this is, I think, an interesting conundrum that when reporting becomes a risk factor in itself, which makes it very hard to deal with an ever amorphous issue. Over to you, Catherine.
Okay, these mics are very on. Again, a big appreciation for inviting us to join you for this important event just ahead of the launch of the 16 Days of Activism campaign and Unite next week. You know, so much has already been said, so I'll just kind of look to kind of add to that where I can. I think one thing that's really important for us to remember is exactly as you said in the introduction, is violence is preventable. This is not something that's inevitable, and we're not starting at zero. There has been decades of work behind us that has informed what we're able to do now, and so we have actually managed to establish an evidence base, and of course that continues to evolve. But there has been great investments by some, including the UK government, for example, that invested in the What Works program to really try and extract what do we know and what seems to be effective and in what context. And that can then inform, of course, scaling up. It can inform investments, and it can inform recommended adaptations for different contexts as well. I think sometimes when we talk about prevention, it can feel very abstract for some. What is prevention? How do you know that what we've done has had an impact when the impact is something didn't happen, right? And so that can feel very vague, you know? And so one thing that UN Women did with a number of sister agencies a few years ago now was we tried to look at that evidence base and say, how can we bring this to something that we can distill down that's easy for people to understand and connect with, and that builds on all the great points that have already been raised in this, you know, including having to work at multiple levels, identifying risk and protective factors to inform prevention efforts. And so that was all distilled down to what we call the Respect Handbook, right, and framework for its prevention. So it has a handbook that accompanies it to really support people in implementation. And so RESPECT is really the different acronyms of the action areas that you would find in that. And so I will quickly just name them here, because I think that it brings them down in a way that feels more accessible, and that also feels like you can connect with it in a way that you can see how it would make sense in your context, because as we've rightly already highlighted, those contexts are very different from one place to another. Including within countries and depending on your own identity as well. And so the first one is relationship skills strengthened, and so that's the R. And then empowerment of women, and that's across multiple facets of empowerment. Services insured, and I think that really goes to what you were talking about reporting. So it's one thing to have a great law in place, but if people don't trust the system or don't trust that they won't be re-victimized, are they going to use that system? Especially if they feel that it could put them at further risk. We have poverty reduced, environments made safe, and of course environments, as we've already shared too, women experience violence across many different environments in their daily lives. And so really taking a look at what the different settings are in which women experience violence. Children and adolescent abuse prevented. Of course, we all know about cycles of abuse as well. And transformed attitudes, beliefs, and norms. And so really this is a long-term vision. I think that's one of the things we struggle with in prevention too. When we get funding, for example, for our work, but we know that it's going to take longer than, say, the 2-3 years of funding that we have to actually demonstrate that our prevention efforts worked, can be a real challenge. So in addition to sustainable and flexible funding, I think having long-term funding to be able to really test what seems to be working, and be able to continue to generate that evidence base in a context that's continually changing, like the one we're dealing with right now in a context of polycrisis, is something that we really need to continue investing in. So that's it for me, thanks.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And we will go to the question about funding in a few minutes. I would like to first turn to Elsa Marie before we go to the other questions. Over to you.
Thank you for inviting me. So I'm going to answer from the lens of Red Dot Foundation's work in the communities. And when we talk about prevention of sexual and gender-based violence, I think first of all, we have to ask ourselves, do people even associate their experience with the terms sexual and gender-based violence? And if you look at the statistics, it's so pervasive. 1 in 3 women on an average experience it. In countries like mine, India, it's close to 95%. But reporting is 80%. Why is that? Maybe because they don't even think that their experience qualifies as a crime or it's gender-based violence. There's fear of dealing with the system. There's honor and shame linked with it, right? So there's a lot of work needed to educate people on their rights, on unconscious bias and conscious bias, on harmful gender norms, and then, of course, on strategies to counter that violence, on the laws that are there. In my country, we have all the laws. But yet, implementation of the law, knowledge of the law is very, very poor. So I think, first of all, when we talk about prevention, it's really investing in education, and I can tell you that is very, very low. It doesn't even feature in the official curriculum. So it's nonprofits like us that really have to invest our time, effort, and money into these programs, often funding it ourselves. The second one is, what about the data? If nobody is reporting, what are we using to implement policies? How are we designing resources? Can I ask you a simple question? So we are the crowd map for sexual violence. It's an open system, so you can check it out. In a 24-hour period, when do you think is the peak that women are reporting being sexually harassed? Take a guess. There's no wrong answer.
Any time during the day.
Yes? Yeah, just name it. Yeah, 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. Anybody else wants to take a guess?
The rest of the day.
It's 5 p.m. It's 5 p.m.
Yeah.
Yet, a lot of urban planners are totally unaware of it. City planners are unaware of it. It's now become a fad to fix street lighting. And street lighting is important, don't get me wrong. It's very important to make you feel safe. Feel safe. But in broad daylight when it's happening, and we discussed it earlier, that means we are blatantly ignoring the experiences of women. So reporting is important. And our community who reports have said that 90% of them have said that they have not gone to the police and will not go to the police, but they want the system to change. How do you expect the system to change if you don't have data? You need the data, and therefore we've created a platform which is completely by design anonymous. There's no naming, shaming, or blaming. The idea is to look at it from a space and time of day perspective so that we can make the best decisions, both at the individual level, at the organizational level, and the community level. The third one is just look around you. How many men are in the room? Thank you for the few men who've shown up. But I feel this is a societal issue, and it's really becoming critical that we bring men into the conversation. Men just don't want to engage. And how can you prevent the violence if they are not even part of the discussion? And I think the work that we do, where we use data, actually helps bring them into the conversation because, one, they respond well to the data, and if you're not naming, shaming, or blaming, they want to be part of the solution. So we need to create more spaces for these honest, authentic conversations to find solutions. So that is what I would say.
Thank you so much, Elsa Marie. Maybe the challenge for our next conversation is we each have to bring a male colleague with us to the conversation.
I say bring a guy to the conversation. Just like when you go to a restaurant and bring your own booze, bring a man.
Bring your own guy to the next event. Okay. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to answer the questions, but also enough time for you to engage with the panelists. So I'm going to pose a bit of a challenge to the panelists. I'm going to read out the next two questions, and then you can decide which one you would like to answer, so that we can go through them, but then also we can have time to have this kind of conversation with you all. So I'll read the two questions at the same time, one after the other. In an ideal world, how would you envisage a response plan to GBV at the global, local, and community level? So that's the first question. And then the second is, how would funding be best utilized? How would you suggest or advise institutional, government, and philanthropic entities to fund organizations to end GBV? And there's another funding question that's going to come at the end, so don't worry, we'll have time to talk about funding. So we could go to in the same order that we went before, and if you could just choose one of these to answer, and then we can proceed with the conversation. Would you like to go ahead, Mangai?
Okay, so just responding to the gender-based violence. So basically, the response to gender-based violence is primarily a reactive measure encompassing multiple responses. One is justice response that deals with ensuring offender accountability. The second one is humanitarian response that safeguards the human dignity. And then third is public health response, promotes health security by protecting against health risks and fostering healthy lives. And the human security response, that the fourth one, protects individuals from critical and pervasive threats. We've been talking about, these are the gender-based violence is a threat to many, many, many individuals that we don't know. Yeah. We can't really measure those. So by addressing these multifaceted aspects of gender-based violence, we can work towards more effective prevention and response strategies. And again, a universal or one-size-fits-all solution for addressing gender-based violence is not feasible. Each type of gender-based violence presents unique challenges that require tailored approaches. For instance, the response to incidents of rape necessitates a specific set of protocols that focus on trauma-informed care, legal support, and recovery services for survivors. In contrast, tackling issues like human trafficking, particularly in conflict situations or zones, demands a different strategy that includes legal advocacy, safe housing, prevention measures, and long-term rehabilitations for victims. So the complexities of each situation underscore the need for nuanced responses to each and every specific type of gender-based violence. So that's my focus on when we develop any response, it has to be specific category of gender-based violence.
Thank you so much. Now turn. I think we had Catherine. No, Luisa. Would you like to take one of the two questions?
Yeah, I think I want to talk about funding. So I just want to share a little bit of what we have been doing at UNF, at the UN Foundation, is that we have, after COVID and seeing what we were seeing, the surge on GBV at all levels, the way in which we thought we could be useful and the thing that we saw that was needed was funding for those organizations that I spoke in my earlier intervention, who were doing the frontline work of, providing services, working with victims, etc. So this is small grants, but it is flexible funding that they can use in whichever way they want to use it. And one of the things that we have learned is that many of these frontline responders or organizations that are working at the grassroots level, oftentimes the ones that are doing the brunt of the work are not registered organizations. So, and oftentimes, these organizations that don't register, or they can't register, or they don't have the capacity to register, or they operate in contexts where registering can be very difficult, they usually tend to be to encompass people who are historically marginalized as well. So whether it is indigenous women or women with intersecting identities. So we are also in our next cohort are planning to also work with organizations that are not registered, basically applying feminist grant-making principles of flexibility, trust, and in a way in which they can use this. And we know one of our grantees, the way in which the funding was used was they had to build a fence around the safe house. And this is funding that, other funders might not allow you to do that. But in this case, we thought, because the funding is flexible, they can go ahead and do these kind of things to ensure the safety of those women who are in the safe house. So this is kind of the kind of thinking. Now, I just want to quickly, and I'm sorry because I'm going to take one more minute, an extra minute, to think about the men in the equation and the way in which we are thinking about it. And I often wonder, why is it that we are not looking at this from their perspective? And sometimes I wonder if maybe some of the funding that we are also talking about should go into research about understanding what men are thinking. And we are seeing all these crises with young men and adolescents who are, of course, social media is heightening that as well. But there's some kind of panic around women being empowered. And so I wonder, maybe there is research already on that, but I think at least at the global level, it would be very useful to also understand and start discussing these issues. Why is it that men don't want to sit at the table? Why is it that men don't want to come to these conversations? Why is it that men are not participating actively, taking the flag and asking the hard questions? And, we talk about deconstructing, but it's often us asking them to deconstruct. It's not them saying, yeah, I need to deconstruct. And even for us to also, in our roles, in our stereotypical roles of, mothers, and try to model, those of us who have boys, what kind of modeling are also, because we are also bringing our own bias. So I wonder to which extent maybe we can expand a little bit this conversation on men, because I think it is critical. I think it's been 30 years, if not more, of us, going around circles, and it is true. I mean, at the end, it's great to talk among friends and among people who understand each other, but maybe we need to start looking at this from a different perspective, and an informed perspective from how men are looking at these issues as well.
Thank you so much, Luisa. And I think kind of thinking about what Mangai was sharing earlier about how this is a multifaceted issue, and we need to have tailored approaches for each sector and group of people that we're thinking about. So if we're also thinking about the other half of the conversation about the men, then there also have to be equally tailored approaches to be able to engage them in the conversation as well. So maybe we go over to Catherine next if you'd like to take one of the questions.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'll take the first one. I think it's a really important question to ask, and I like the way that it's been framed, of looking at different levels, because I think one thing that needs to happen is this needs to work in a coordinated way. So from the global level, which is the international norm setting and things like this, to the role of national governments, to how that gets played out at local levels, including at community level with the work of grassroots women's organization, that all needs to be cohesive in a way, because that's how you create a supporting environment to even approach the issue and to be effective in our work. And so in an ideal world is the question, right? How would this look, And so in an ideal world, actually, we wouldn't have panels like this. I wouldn't have a job anymore in an ideal world, right? So what would it take for us to get there, right? And so we would need, for sure, things to be integrated. They would need to be comprehensive, which means bringing also prevention and response together as part of a full kind of 360 approach to the issue. It needs to be flexible as well. We really need to take intersectionality issues into consideration and adapt our programming and our support for survivors and our prevention work to the needs of different women. Wherever they are. It needs to be survivor-centered and trauma-informed. We're getting more and more research about what this looks like, what it means, and how we can enhance our offer of programs. And I think another thing that really needs to happen here is we really need to take a hard look at partnerships. And what does that look like? How does a partnership work from when we're looking at all of these different levels? And so that needs to be vertical partnerships, but also horizontal partnerships. So already what we've heard in the panel, there's a role for urban planning, there's a role for justice, there's a role for community groups. How are these actors coming together to share information to make sure that we're working as one and in the right direction, not reinventing the wheel? We know the resources are too few anyways to service the need. And so how can we work together in a way that we can maximize our efficacy, our efficiency, and really have the impact on the ground that we need to? So I think really thinking about those horizontal and vertical partnerships and what that looks like in action is something that we need to spend a little bit more time on in order to really effectively be making the change we want to see, and including holding perpetrators to account. Which is not something we always see. Doing this, of course, will also require political will. It will require a lot of political will in order to be really serious about it, and at different levels, including at local levels. And local level leadership for this is really important. And for what our research has shown at UN Women too is really strengthening women's movements. So having strong, autonomous, well-resourced feminist movements is actually it's like the key to really kind of moving policy change in favor of ending violence against women. And so ensuring that women's movements have access to sustainable, flexible funding over time is really key, and it's really critical. And I think the one thing I would add to that piece as well that serves us well, since we find ourselves in an educational institution, is bridging those different areas as well. There's so much, practical knowledge, not practice-based knowledge and evidence, that can be, I think, captured in a stronger way and shared with academics and vice versa. I don't think that we always communicate well together in the same kind of using the same words and language. And so I think there is some work there too to bring these different stakeholder groups together in a stronger way. I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
I think it's really nice to also like acknowledge where we are and kind of what can be done already when individuals are doing their education. We'll go over to you, Elsa Marie.
I think both the questions are kind of linked. So I always like to say we need intention and investment. And I think both are lacking. To Mangai's point, first of all, we need to understand the different forms of violence and the context in which it happens. And then you can design a response to it. And I have seen through our data, within a city it's different, between cities in the same country it's different, between countries it's different, So you cannot have a standardized response. And therefore funders need to understand that. Funders need to trust the organizations closest to the problem to effectively implement their programs. And that is not happening. And either they don't understand or they are stuck in a time warp or they are gatekeepers. And I can tell you from Red Dot Foundation, our experience, you need people who have a bold vision and you need people who are willing to get out of their comfort zones. When we apply, because I'm the chief fundraiser, I write all the applications myself. If I write to a traditional grant donor, the chances of us getting that grant are near to zero. But if I apply for an innovation award, if I write to, just say an award, okay, a tech award, a sustainability award, an innovation award, the chances of actually getting through are pretty close to 100. Now, what is the difference? It's the person reading the applications, in my view. On this side, they are too afraid to test out new things. They're stuck in the same old comfort zone, whereas here they're looking for out-of-box thinking, innovation, new approaches, and they're willing to take the risk. Now, we have to ask ourselves, who's actually in control of the money? And who are they giving it to? Are they giving it to their familiar friends down the line, or they're willing to invest in new approaches? And I've begun to think that, we don't have those kind of people, or they're not allowed to think beyond. So that's why I think at Red Dot Foundation, we are now trying to set up our own fund where we can fund innovative approaches on the ground. So as long as people have a technological mindset to implement, new approaches, willing to experiment, it's okay to fail as well. And here we expect, short-term grants being given on the ground for an issue like sexual and gender-based violence, and we want to see impact of change immediately. When there's so much of deep historical work that has to be done, a lot of change in attitude, behavior, norms, etc. So I don't think the current funding model works, in my view. And we've already spoken about unrestricted, long-term funding, trust-based philanthropy. I can share a link with you all. I've written about it for Aspen Institute on decolonizing development and aid. Please read it. I think we need to trust people on the ground to respond to their communities in a way that makes sense and is resonant.
I think we could have a whole other panel on that.
Yeah, we could.
So I'm going to pose the last question to our panelists, and I want you all to be ready to ask questions because we want to hear what your interests are and what you want to learn more from the panelists. So I'll pose a question. We can maybe go in the reverse order to change things a little bit, and then we'll return to the audience. So the last question is, what do you still see as a gap in research that needs to be funded to? Let me try that again. What do you still see as a gap in research that needs to be funded to be done? I think that question was written a little bit. So basically, gaps in research and what should be funded. So maybe we go to you, Elsa Marie. You can expand a little bit on what you were saying.
So I started off by saying that I want to share my work or my thoughts through the lens of Red Dot Foundation. So I jumped into this development sector straight from the corporate sector. So I had no background in gender studies, and I didn't come from the women's movement. I just did what was practical, resonant to me as a survivor myself, and which made sense, as in I could see impact that I thought was impact. And later, we had colleagues like Mangai and others using our data to make sense of it. So I think we went the reverse way, where we use practical data and practical experiences, and then the theory came later. I think what we need, I won't say gap in research, but I think we need more partnerships and collaboration between those who look at things from a theoretical framework and those on the ground who are really just in the weeds, responding to community and doing the best that they can. And then if we can explain what we are doing, then maybe the funders will start to understand it, because every sector has their own language in which they communicate. And I think that would be a win-win for all.
I think also for students too, no? Like when you're in, I remember when I was a student, you study all this, and you are in theory, and you're surrounded by people who are excellent at the research that they do, but then you often wonder, how is it going to be applied? So I think even, of course, as individuals who are doing work on the ground and the people who are doing the research, but I'm sure also the students would benefit from being able to see how is that applied, and to be able to imagine in the future how they're going to be able to use their education. So still going in the reverse order, so I think we'll go back to Catherine. Yeah.
Thanks. I mean, there's so many things we could add to this, isn't it? I think I'll try and keep to two things. So, this conversation is happening in the lead up to the Beijing plus 30, right? And 5 years ago was Beijing plus 25. Right? And there were some gaps identified in that report, including addressing sexual harassment and technology-facilitated gender-based violence, that I think have progressed a lot in recent years, but that we still have a long way to go. And so for technology-facilitated violence against women, it was a bit of a lift to get it even recognized as an issue, which it is increasingly. There's still, it's not that it's a new issue, right? I mean, this has been happening since technology has been invented, and continues to evolve as tech evolves. But our understanding really of what that means within our ecosystem of addressing violence against women is something where we are still lacking a lot of evidence, including around prevention, including around response. And we're also seeing these kind of two tracks of systems where it's either, IT and digital rights activists who are working on maybe access and control over tech, and all of a sudden are confronted with all these GBV issues that they don't know how to address properly, or it's people who are traditional actors in the GBV space who don't really understand and know how to leverage tech for that work, right? And so I think there's a lot there. And so to that point, UN Women with the Association for Progressive Communications, a global partnership, SVRI, we did come together and did a big kind of global consultation to identify priorities related to that. And so we've developed a shared research agenda. It is available online, which is meant to do exactly what this question suggests, which is where should we prioritize research and investment into research to try and answer some of these questions with regards to TFGBV. And I think within that, one of the really critical things that we cannot waste more time on is understanding this intergenerational challenge that we're seeing with young men, and how the online-offline continuum is really affecting violence in women's lives. It's affecting norms, behaviors, attitudes in a way that we have never seen. It's affecting election cycles. And we really need to have a better grasp of what that means, and how can we turn those tides and really quick, because otherwise we will be trying to catch up for years to come.
Thank you so much. And I don't know maybe how many people are familiar with kind of the UN system and how those conversations and negotiations go. And I'm sure maybe Luisa can also speak to that, how I do remember how difficult it was for that to be discussed and to be accepted, as like how technology really kind of emboldens people in a way that we haven't been able to understand, and how important it is to bring that to the fore. So we turn over to you, Luisa, to look at the gaps in research and funding.
Well, So UNF doesn't do research. So for me, it's a little bit difficult to say, and I'm not involved in research. But one thing I can say is, what I already said it about, looking at or trying to understand the perspective of men. I think that's something that maybe that's a gap that we haven't, or someone probably has already looked at it, but I certainly haven't seen anything about it. But related to technology facilitated technology facilitated violence, it's a bit of a
It's a tongue twister.
what's a word in English, a mouthful or something. It's hard for me to pronounce. Anyways, I would say that one thing related to that, where I think maybe in Latin America there's a little bit more of that, and I don't know globally if there's attention being paid to this, is the violence that women involved in politics are facing, which has been amplified by technology and social media. And that's an important, I think from a feminist perspective, it's so powerful to see, let's put it this way, politics seems to be, to me at least, the way I see it, is the ultimate breaking of the mold of the stereotypes that women, the social roles that women are given to us. So women in power, women in positions of power are probably perceived as some kind of threat, who are also going to make the breaking of the mold across the board. So there's something very, very powerful and significant about how this violence, because it's not only it's gender-based violence, but it's the kind of vitriol that is directed to women who are involved in politics. And you can see it everywhere in the world, in the global south, here in America, in Europe. It's just, I think there's a lot more that perhaps we are not understanding that is happening there. What are the dynamics, and why is it that this particular type of violence against women is just so pervasive, as we see more and more women, and we see more and more women participating, and we also see women stepping down because of that violence, because we know of cases of women who have said, I had enough, I can't take it anymore. So I think that's an area in which perhaps it would be interesting to have a better understanding and put more efforts into understanding that area better with research and data.
I think that connects to what was being said earlier. I think it was Elsa Marie who was talking about this kind of deep, deeply rooted norms and attitudes that it's like a generational level of effort that has to be made to see the kind of changes that we would like to see in society. We'll go over to you, Mangai.
Okay, so this is where my time comes in, because years of my research on gender-based violence, on various types of violence, gender-based violence. So from a researcher angle, there is a gap. There are many gaps, I would say. I just wanted to point out 4 of them. And it's a long list, though, but I will just briefly say. One is the research methods in gender-based violence that we identified. There is a growing recognition of the importance of diverse research methodologies in addressing and understanding the complex issue of gender-based violence. Specifically, the qualitative and participatory approaches are increasingly utilized as a valuable tool to gather insights into survivors' experiences. And also, we can also think about talking to the perpetrators too, in a sense, and the dynamics that contribute to gender-based violence across various cultural contexts. And Elsa said, her various crowdsourced data is available, and one could really do applied research, plotting all this data into GPS and the mapping, GIS mapping, and identify the hotspots of all this, say for example, sexual harassment in locations, and identify those locations and see where we can really introduce measures to deal with them, or what is happening in those locations. Study, go and do the field research on the locations and identify what is needed. So those are the things of applied research that could be undertaken as a practical measure to deal with the specific problem of any gender-based violence. And we all talked about the multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary, because what do we mean by multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary is, see, criminologists working with IT industry partners, it's partnerships, and health industries and service providers. Working with them to really deal with the problem is a very important thing, to even identify the risk factors and protective factors that could address with a different lens, public health lens or public safety, cultural victimology, and lifestyle lens. All these things are very, very important. This is where the transdisciplinary approach will be quite useful. And one important thing Elsa also made, the partnership with researchers. So basically, we have to have the capacity building of international researchers and the development of the international consortium of research training, because many of them, they don't know how to even do research in many locations. So the research training institutes that could accelerate research by bringing together diverse disciplines to tackle gender-based violence globally, whether in the global south or global north. The last one is the intersectionality research, what Catherine was talking about. Conducting intersectionality research is essential. That involves examining how overlapping social identities, such as race, class, gender, and sexual orientation, on top of it, the cultural conditions, where they are coming from, the country, interact to create unique experiences and forms of oppression related to gender-based violence. Such research is crucial for addressing the specific needs of diverse populations and crafting more effective responses to gender-based violence. Finally, a comprehensive global inventory of reactive and proactive measures should be compiled to ensure the evidence-based solutions in dealing with the gender-based violence at large.
I'm glad that we turned to you last to give us a comprehensive approach and really thinking about the types of gaps in research that we see and how we can approach that in a different way. So I would like to turn to you now, because I know you've been listening very closely and intently and been waiting to ask questions, so that you can engage with our panels and ask them if maybe there's some things that they have mentioned before that you'd like to hear more about, or other types of questions that welcome as well. So I see 2 hands there. So maybe we can take a few at a time. Would that help? And then we can turn back to our panelists. So we'll take these 2 questions here. I think just wait for the mic so we can hear you.
Hi, I'm Connie Newman. I am a medical doctor, and I represent Medical Women's International Association. And I know that as healthcare professionals, we are not trained properly in identifying victims, or survivors of violence, nor are we trained in trauma-informed care. At least not all of us are trained in trauma-informed care. But my question is about the patriarchal society in which we have been living for hundreds of years. And it seems that obviously needs to change if we're going to eliminate or markedly reduce violence against women. So one of my questions, which I think about struggling with, is how can we influence policymakers and government officials who really don't like women, or don't care about women? And I'm thinking particularly about the country that I live in, which is the United States. I don't know if anyone can help with that.
Awesome. Hi, thank you so much. Do you want me to?
Yes, please.
Give it
Go
back.
ahead. Go ahead, Max. I think what we do, we'll take the first two and we'll turn to the panelists, and it would turn back to you if that's all right.
First
Yeah.
two? Okay, awesome. My question to the panelists is, I know that we have a lot of young people in the room, and we always hear about how to, mobilize as a group and really to get involved. But as individuals who might not be in organizations or in a place of really mobilizing as a group, as individuals, what is your advice, or how would you describe the best way of getting involved with preventing GBV?
Thank you so much, Matt. So two important questions. One on the patriarchal society that we live in, and then the other one about mobilizing young people. So would any of the panelists?
I can go first.
Okay, over to you. Ready to take the charge.
Yeah. So, I'm a very practical person. If you're part of an organization, nothing stops you from taking the lead in trying to create policies that are inclusive. You can organize the trainings. So you can have a bottom-up approach whilst also having a top-down approach. If we wait for the UN to pass a resolution, our governments to endorse it, and this country has not endorsed many of the conventions, and then for it to trickle down will take years or decades or centuries. So, and I'm somebody also who just wants to get on with it and do it, right? So I remember when I was in corporate, and I was the head of my department, we weren't talking about DEI, we weren't talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I was heading a very strategic department, and I would get all male CVs. And I went to HR, and I said, how come there are only male CVs? I want women CVs. And they said, oh, but we go to these engineering colleges, and there aren't very many women engineers. And I said, first of all, who said I want engineers? I don't want engineers. So I changed the system. I said, okay, we are going to assign logical tests, analytical tests, because that was the requirement of the job. And I will not close this position until I've seen a variety of CVs. And that's how I ended up with 1/3 of my team as women, and then when my airline shut down, they went on to the Middle East Airlines, and they did very well, these women. But I had to call up my counterparts and say, listen, you will have to change the way you handle these women. They are amazing, they are excellent, but they're highly emotional. And that should not be seen as a weakness. If I could do that, and HR told me, oh, you're the only head of department who has all these requirements. And I said, okay, fine, I'm not closing the position till you do as I say. So each of us, and that comes to your question too, we operate in a community, we operate in an institution, and we do have a sphere of influence. Understand what is your sphere of influence and what are you willing to push. All of us want to be in our comfort zones. You have to get out of the comfort zone. You have to. And there's so many resources out there. You can bring in external speakers, external organizations to do the training. Find the entrepreneurs within your organizations who can champion it at leadership level and have that policy. And there are a lot of other countries that have best practices. So even if in this country you don't have it, maybe look for some other country that has a standard. And I think that is quite possible if each of us does that. At the individual level, I think the public discourse is so much, even in my country, that nobody wants to really have honest conversations, And just like I said, if you're coming to a gender event, bring a man. I think find somebody who you have different views from and invite them for a cup of coffee and try to find common ground. It is the hard work that we all have to put in, but it's necessary. And then also another thing is, in our sector, we tend to use a lot of jargon. We tend to use a lot of words which nobody understands outside of this. Even a simple term as patriarchy, I can tell you, ask somebody, an ordinary person, and ask them to unpack it, they won't be able to do that. So let's simplify things and start with the assumption that people don't know and that we need to educate them. And yes, it is an effort, but we have to make that effort. And then again, don't go in with judgment, you know? Like go in truly from the lens that you want to understand what is their perspective, which is, you know, why are men not engaging? In our experience, 60% of our volunteers are young men. And when you create the right climate and space for them to engage, they really want to engage. They don't want to be seen as perpetrators. They want to be part of the solution. But we don't really invite them in or truly invite them in.
I know I'm supposed to be the moderator, but I can't help it. I think that last point about how sometimes we don't want to invite men into the conversations, I think especially for women who have been dealing with some of these things so viscerally and personally, there is a desire to create spaces where women feel safe to be able to talk about these topics. So then how do we understand the language that speaks to the need for that, but then the language that speaks to kind of understanding how men want to be viewed in the society as well. I just wanted to add that a little bit there.
But not all spaces have to be with them.
Yeah.
You can have women-only spaces, but you can also create spaces for them to come in.
Exactly. Would anybody else like to
Okay.
address the two questions that were asked? Please, Mangai.
So just to answer your question, Connie, the patriarchal system is forever. And we've been seeing, you know, maybe in my time it will be vet, or maybe later on, the young minds are here to really work with the mobility issues, how to really bring them on board to dismantle those structures. They are the ones who can do it. And as a matter of fact, I'm the first one in my clan, my village, my family to go to a college. And I broke the structure of patriarchy in my system. And now the young girls in my family, cousins, children, everybody, now I want to be like Mangai auntie. I want to be like my Manga. So this is where we see the strength and dismantle those patriarchal structure and want to be empowered and empower others and bring them on board. And this is a very important thing. And you recognize that we are not trained in trauma-informed care. But now there is a recognition. So break the cycle and bring more people into providing trauma training to public health sectors. And medical doctors, they are the ones who are in touch with the victims or survivors when they are in emergency. And they need to really know all those things to help those individuals who come to you and just, this is what it is, I have to give you a prescription. No. You have to be a bit more sort of compassionate about the victims and also survivors. What are they going through? And then the trauma that they are in, and then they need just nice, comforting words. And these are the things, especially the medical practitioners need to really incorporate into their medical training courses too. So this is basically, all those things are part of breaking the cycle and getting through the challenges and the structures of patriarchy.
Thank you. Would you? No. So I think because of the time that we have left, and I know that there are probably a number of questions that people want to ask, I will ask if there's everybody else who has a question. I don't know how many questions we have in the audience. Could I see a raise of hands? We have just two. Okay, so perhaps we'll take these two questions and I'll turn back to the panel to see if you would like to answer them. And any concluding thoughts you would like to share, and then we'll move into the closing after that. Please.
Yes, hello. I wanted to ask if are we going to consider environmental violence and how to deal with it? Because we're talking about violence and technology, policy, politics, but yeah, what happens with the environment? Thank you.
I, Kisia Gonzalez from Honduras, Garifuna person, ethnic group, African descendant, as you see. And my question is going around that issue. I have a background in, my degree is in medicine, and I summarize because I heard of all of you, and you have been excellent in your presentation. Thank you very much for your exposition. But I get that the principles might be general or standardized in violence against women, but the approach, I think, must be individualized, must be separate. And in order to do that, and taking what Ms. Tavern exposed about communication, and you questioning how we bring men to the discussion, is very necessary to talk about culture. We have the general approach must be cultural, and how you can give any advice and how to approach from that perspective the cultural aspect, and that will have to tackle in the aspect of political and communication, which is basic. As a medical doctor, I could say how important it is, this communication, because a person can be talking about something, you understanding another one, but the aspect of their culture, they are talking in something different. That is my comment.
Thank you so much for the question. So we have two questions, one on kind of this parallel of the way I understood it, maybe this is also an example of communication. You know, when we talk about the extractive, exploitative attitudes that we have towards women, we also see them towards the environment. So how is that connected? And if anybody wants to speak to that. And then there's a question about culture and communication. And so I don't know if anybody would like to take those. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for raising those points. I think they're both really important. On the question of environmental violence, I mean, there are really strong links with gender-based violence, you know, both as cause and consequence. And I think that's an evidence-based. And in fact, I had written it down. I didn't speak to it, but it was one of the points that I had written down to raise as well in the session. So thank you for bringing it up. I think that's an area that we really need to better understand in many different ways, you know, and that includes, you know, our whole approach to disaster risk reduction, like to working across a nexus approach as well, and really understanding how do we maintain a lens on gender equality and prevention when we're in a humanitarian context. And I don't think we've successfully answered all of those questions. There's a lot of thinking around these areas, but it is, you know, it is something that's increasingly tangible for us to really feel the effects of. And women are disproportionately affected in a number of different ways, including livelihoods in many places as well, where women are primarily working in agricultural and rural spaces and things like this. And so there is a lot there that is starting to emerge, but I would absolutely put that, in fact, I did, in where is it a gap that needs to be funded when we're looking at research. To your point on culture, I mean, yes. You know, that's actually why I really liked the question before about ideally what does this look like from a global down to community level. Because I think, you know, when we're talking about prevention and response, I mean, it really needs to make sense where we are and where we sit, you know, and that looks very different. And so there's many different examples of how in different indigenous cultures, for example, deal with perpetrators of violence or deal with survivors of violence. And I think recognizing those as legitimate pathways as well needs to be part of that solution. And so I think that there's a lot of examples around that, but you know, until we have the reflex of really having an intersectional lens on things, and also being able to say as service providers too, where our limits are and where we might need additional support, and really listening to victim survivors when they tell us their stories. I think that's, you know, where we need to be kind of creating more openness, I suppose, yeah.
How it should be reflexive, it should be concise, and all of that connection in terms of how to get together a clear idea and how to find a solution. our path to resolve the issue of gender violence.
If I may just completely in agreement on the question of culture. I think it's very important. But I tend to get a little bit nervous, and I'll be absolutely honest here. And maybe it is the years that I spent sitting in UN discussions, because culture can be used also as an excuse for perpetrating violations of human rights. So I think in all of these discussions, we always have to remind ourselves, like and now I feel like I'm speaking in code words of the UN, like cultural relativism. And by the way, my husband and kids, when they want to make fun of me, they start saying patriarchy, because these words outside of our circles, they lose a little bit of meaning. So we also should be able to laugh ourselves and relax a little bit and learn to decodify some of the language that we use in these circles. So anyways, but I think it is a reality, and it's connected with the fact that we are not able to recognize when you are being the victim of an act of violence against women. You don't recognize it. And why the Me Too movement came about. Or maybe some of us, or a lot of us, knew that this was wrong, but we didn't know it was a crime. We didn't know it was, because in our culture it was accepted, it was okay for your boss to, do something, or for your coworker to tell you something, of color. It was okay. I'm from Venezuela, so we're Latinos. We say these things. It's fine. It is not okay. So when we discuss culture, we always have to bring these things to the surface in our conversations, that culture cannot be used as an excuse for allowing women's rights violations. So
it's really important to address what you are mentioning right now, because can be used in both ways.
Exactly.
But there is an aspect of that cultural, in answering your own question about how we bring men, women in our culture are fomented in some way machismo.
Exactly.
Exactly. So we need to understand that and to tailor answer to those aspects in where we feel to nurture exactly the bias and the foundation of the problem we want to solve.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And then on the issue of environmental and violence, I think this calls for a discussion in terms of, and back in Venezuela, and I'm sorry for bringing this up, but Venezuela all the time, and this is where I'm from. The legislation on violence against women that was approved probably in 2007, I believe it was one of the first, it was Venezuela and Argentina that typified, is that a word in English? The classified different types of forms of violence, and I think at the time it was 24 or 25 different modalities of violence. And that created a lot of debate, because some people felt that violence against women should be classified across, 3 different big groups, and then you have, other categories under each umbrella. But other people felt like it was important to really codify like every specific way of, violence against women. So that's one thing, because I think, granted that we don't have, enough research and all that, perhaps there might be a point in which we could see a movement towards, environmental violence against women or something to that sort, when in fact this could be subsumed in other types of violence. For instance, now there is a lot of, I know the Center for Reproductive Rights is doing a lot of advocacy and research on how fertilizers affect reproductive health in places like in Colombia, for instance. So it is an environmental concern, but it could be, it could fall under reproductive violence, if you will. So it is connected, but it's not necessarily like it is an environmental type of violence against women. So I guess it's an interesting question because it poses these other layers of analysis that we should also be discussing as a sector. So.
Thank you so much, Luis. I think, Elsa Marie, you wanted to address some of the questions as well.
Yeah, so our platform, Safe City, is now crowd mapping intersectionality with climate change. And this was at the request of someone in the Brazilian government, especially in the Amazon area. And when we started, of course, nobody understood or associated their experience with climate in a normal situation. And as we started doing this project, they had the floods in South Brazil. And in that situation, yes, everyone understands gender-based violence because of this extreme event. But on a daily basis, again, women and girls and other vulnerable communities may or may not associate their experience. So we need to educate them, we need more research, we need to understand it better ourselves, which is where we are at the exploration stage right now. But I can tell you, in seeing our data this year, where consistently we've had stalking patterns in Delhi, this year, because of the heat, I don't know if you're aware, but the summer was really, really hot, 50 degrees and more, 50 degrees Celsius and more, the stalking patterns actually changed. And that was really interesting, and we have to monitor that next year and see, because then you can come up with responses at the government and institution level. So it's early days. I do think that we should invest, not just in the research, but also in the education. And then culture. Culture is absolutely important. I'll give you a simple thing. In India, sexual harassment is often considered as eve-teasing and trivialized, and your experiences are dismissed. So we very consciously said we will only refer to it as sexual violence, all categories of it. But my partner in Kibera, she chose to use the word sexual harassment because sometimes their violence at home is so intense that nobody wants to deal with it. It's too big a problem for them to feel like they have agency over it. So just using the word sexual harassment helped them feel that, yes, it is possible to address this situation. So simple things like the context in which this violence occurs really matters because nothing looks the same.
Did you want to come in,
Yeah,
Magai, please?
Just about the culture. The culture is a culprit everywhere. And the thing is, how do we really break the cultural sort of notion in individuals to deal with the gender-based violence? I just give you an example from El Salvador, close to Honduras. And with the funding of UNDP and other sources, FUSAD as an NGO developed a progressive web app in order to really get more women to report sexual harassment. Okay, so which is private, it's anonymous. You can really go through the website or download the app, and then we have developed a survey because I'm part of that project. Developed a survey, and then the survey included in the app. You have no idea. We have about 1,000 plus reporting had happened, which is an innovative way to really bring more people, breaking the culture, and come and report so that we know what's happening, because that app has got GPS introduced measures, because which route of bus transportation the crimes, sexual harassment is happening, what time, and everything is being included. So we are just ready to really analyze the data. So basically, the funding should be more on innovative, simple, evidence-based measures or solutions to deal with specific problems. So this is happening, and more, this data is not available with police or anywhere else. These sort of data are important to really break the cycle of silence and also break the cultural context in which it's happening.
Thank you so much. Oh,
Thank you for your answer, but I need to.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I have to, because I have my colleagues looking at me. So, but I think there will be an opportunity perhaps at the end to continue to chat. And I think this is actually encouraging because it means that there's need to continue to have these conversations. I just want to say thank you, all of you, for engaging in the conversation. I want to thank our panelists for being very generous with your time and coming to speak with us. And I want to say something that maybe I didn't as your moderator at the very beginning. You may have noticed in the advertising for this event that we had Ambassador Narvaez, who was meant to join us and unfortunately had a family emergency, so wasn't able to be here with us. So I just want to say an extra thank you to Luisa for stepping in and joining our panel today. It's been a very wide-ranging conversation. I hope that this will incentivize you and encourage you to participate in the 16 days of activism. There are many toolkits that are available. The City of New York also has one that's online, so you can use it and participate in this initiative. And just one more time, thank you so much for being here with us today. Over to you, Pam.
We want to thank you again for being here, and a special thanks to our magnificent panelists. You really did interrogate the gender-based violence and prevention, response, and funding. And I think that the entire audience got a lot out of it, and let's give them another. A couple of things. Our December 12th program is going to look at education, and the speakers will be Olivera Jokic, Director of Gender Studies Program at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. For opening remarks, Gail Garfield, Professor and Chair of Africana Studies Department here at John Jay College. Mrs. Amber Barth, Director of ILO for U.S. and Canada, and Minister Aya Yoshida, Permanent Mission of Japan to the United Nations in New York. So please come. Again, it's free, and we'll be serving dinner. It will be at 6:30 on the December 12th. Additionally, for those of you who are not familiar, the 16-day campaign has been moved to CUNY, to the Sexual and Reproductive Justice Hub at CUNY, and this year's theme of bodily autonomy is going to be stretched from 16 days to 365 days. So it's going to be a 12-month process. We encourage you to become a member of NGO CSW. We have the QR code outside. Please scan and join us as we try to conquer gender-based violence in all of the other of the 12 critical areas that have been identified in the Beijing Platform for Action. Mads is our intern, and she has an announcement, and immediately following her announcement, we'd like for you to join us in the far corner so we can take a group photo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for giving me the space to speak about this. I want to speak really quickly, because I know we're over time, quickly, specifically to the youth and young adults in the room. We kind of talked about today how to get involved individually and as a community against GBV and other areas. But I wanted to add that I am creating a youth advocacy circle. It's called the Advocacy Circle New York City. And we have 3 goals, and we want to educate, advocate, and support. So what does this mean? Simply, we want to open conversations and discussions with young adults and people who aren't as involved in the political spectrum to get you more involved and to educate and really get you out and provide mutual aid opportunities in areas where you can go out and support your local nonprofits and communities around you. So if you are interested, I do have this awesome sheet over here that I'm going to put out on the table. But if you do have any more questions or want to know more about our organization, just come up and ask me. I'm available to talk. We just created an Instagram literally yesterday called the Advocacy Circle NYC. The Advocacy Circle NYC. It's on Instagram. We're looking to be on LinkedIn and Facebook pretty soon. And we're also looking to have our first event in the beginning of December. I think it's going to be the second week of December. And it's going to be actually on the media and how it has affected our young men, our young boys, and the presidential election this past month. So if you're interested in joining or interested in finding other ways to help in the community, mutual aid and support, let me know, or just go up to this lovely sheet of paper outside and scan this QR code and fill out that interest form. So thank you again for allowing me to speak, and I appreciate your time.
And thank you, Max. And before we close, just a reminder, NGO CSW is nonprofit, nonpartisan. We do not support any party, but we do support the empowerment and opportunities for women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good. Just leave it here.
That's why I'm asking now. I know the face. And from my friends at UNFPA.